That's probably the dirty, unknown secret in all consumer goods. If you go to any store, before it gets onto the retail floor, it's in a bag. Every shirt is in a bag. And so, I think that's a small piece, but it has tremendous impact to be able to move that kind of out of the supply chains.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Shopify Masters, a weekly podcast powered by Shopify, your companion for starting and building a business. I'm your host, Felix Tia. Sometimes your best business ideas come from unexpected moments. That's exactly what happened to Brian Pape back in 2006. While skiing and filming with a video camera, he lost control and slammed into a tree. The crash broke his femur in two. And for anyone that's been through this, you know it's an incredibly painful and dangerous injury. It was at that moment that Brian had an epiphany to leave behind a legacy he could be proud of. For Brian, it was bridging the gap between business and philanthropy to give back while doing business. 3 years later, he founded MiiR. MiiR makes drinkware and reusable bottles, and every product sold helps fund a trackable project. To date, MiiR has given over $3 million, affecting the lives of over 100,000 people. Brian, welcome to Shopify Masters.
Thanks for having me on.
First of all, what an inspiring story. During this epiphany, you wanted to create a philanthropy-driven business. Why specifically in the drinkware and bottle business?
It is kind of funny to think about bottles. I wasn't necessarily thinking about bottles against that tree, but it was really a catalytic moment for myself. Sitting against that tree, there were two things that came to mind. The first being, I was dating my now wife. We've been dating for about 3 years. That moment that, me almost dying kind of took me the realization that I should, maybe marry this incredible woman, kind of highlights how much I was focused on just myself and not others. Fast forward, after we started MiiR, we've been married 15 years, 3 kids. We work together. We're having a blast in life. And the second thing I thought about was, again, very inward focused. What would people say about me at my funeral? So if you can think about like selfishness, you're thinking about yourself when you're dying. And I realized at that moment, nobody would have gotten up at my funeral and said anything positive about me impacting the community or not leaving a legacy of impact. And, I'd been fortunate enough to see my grandfather, who had passed away in 96, have an incredible life that he left. There was an amazing legacy from that man. And, I quickly realized that, I needed to change something in my life and I wanted to do something about it. And I was, kind of an entrepreneur at the time. We saw this opportunity to really design and manufacture a better looking water bottle. And then from there it was, we wanted to have every transaction have impact. And so, we learned about the clean water crisis in 2009. We're close to 1 billion people lacked access to clean water. And we thought, well, if we're selling water bottles, it makes sense to get back to clean water. And so that was kind of the moment of us leaning into what has been so far a really fun ride and journey to help people around the world. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you recognize that there's an opportunity to make better bottles. So describe to us your bottles. What does it feel like to pick up and hold a MiiR bottle that's different than any other bottle that you might find off the shelf?
Yeah, totally. So that you say off the shelf, and that was what a lot of bottles were, is, in the world of sourcing, a lot of people will just go to the lowest common denominator, meaning they'll go to a supplier and say, hey, can I see your catalog of things that are already made? And they just slap a logo on it and call it a day. So for us, you pick up a bottle and it fits really nicely in your hand. So we call it human-centered design at MiiR. And so for us, it's, we really think through, how do you carry something? How does it feel in the hand? So we spend an extraordinary amount of time thinking about just actual use. What is the average, circumference or diameter of a cup holder in a car? If you're commuting, how, the size of fingers and hands, how do we make lids so that, most people can hold it comfortably? And then when you drink from it, what is that experience? And it sounds funny to just talk about like a drinking experience, but we spend a lot of time about how does the mouth feel? What is the opening? What is the size of the opening? And we think they're really gorgeous. It's kind of this Scandinavian, Japanese, really clean design that's I've always been drawn to. And so it's definitely heavily influenced into really all of our products these days.
Yeah, so it sounds like this process of designing the perfect bottle for all of these use cases for fitting into a cup holder is not a straightforward process. So tell us about that initial process to create the first prototype or first iteration of your products?
Yeah, this is 2009 is when I started working on the first bottle, and it's kind of like pre-3D. I mean, 3D printing was happening, but not at the level it is now. We have 3D printers in our office, and we can spin up prototypes, in hours. But back then it was, a lot of renderings, a lot of just looking at it visually, working with an industrial designer, and then ultimately, tooling up. And I think that was really a fun journey for at least for myself, of like working with a supplier and saying, okay, how, what can we do? And, I'd been in the hand warmer production where there's not much CAD design. There's no industrial design. You're literally filling dirt into a bag. And so this was quite the experience to like work with a factory. And when you start to learn about injection molding and hydroforming, it's literally blue sky. It's like, I think I asked this really naive question of like, oh, hey, can we do a lid like this? And they were like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. You just have to give us the design files. And so that really kind of opened my mind to the capability of designing. And that process, I'd say, is really about stripping away. There's a lot of things on the market, a lot of bottles where it's just additive, where there's all these bells and whistles and things. You can put your car keys in it and it tracks hydration, and there's LED lights, and we just take away as much as we can to make a really, really elegant experience for a drinking bottle.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things there around like injection molding, especially 15 years ago when you were working on this for the first time. It was probably way more expensive than it is today. Do you remember how much of an investment, like how risky it was for you to jump in and try to create a bottle like this?
I remember we had 3 bottle sizes. We had kind of a 27 ounce, a 20 ounce, and a 14 ounce. And the tooling, I remember the tooling for everything plus the lids was like $20,000. That was the moment of truth of like, okay, we're doing this. We're committing to making this bottle. It better be right. And, and then, I had been over to our suppliers. And so there was a bit of trust built, but, you wire the money, and 60 days later, you get your first sample, and, you get to open the package and feel it in the form for the first time. And it's quite the experience, I will say. And I remember specifically, my wife and I, we were headed up to Whistler during Thanksgiving in 2009 with some friends. And we were late to go up there because we were waiting for UPS to deliver the package, and it finally delivered. So we jump in the car, my wife's driving, and I could point exactly where I was on 405 outside of Seattle on the way up to Whistler, opening the box and looking at the product, and just admiration. I was like, this is so cool.
So the other part of your business was around charities and grants that you're giving. And with your product to project model, you like to give to organizations where there's an intersection between people and environment. At first we're talking about water-based charities made sense. What are other kind of examples of organizations that you worked with since?
Yeah. So we, like you said, we're really centered around grant making that impacts people and the environment. And so examples of that are, we've done some grants up in the Skagit Valley, which is north of Seattle. There's a bunch of agriculture up there as well. And so there's a farm incubator up there that we've helped fund. We actually helped them fund a well for them, not for drinking water, but for, watering crops. And helping these farmers who are trying to start their own farms, minorities who are trying to learn how to get into owning their own land and developing their own businesses. So we're really passionate about helping entrepreneurs, whether that's via nonprofits or for-profit companies. But most of our grants, I'd say, are around clean water. A lot of them have been around whether it's carbon sequestration, whether it's planting trees. We've also funded a lot of mobility issues. So with World Bicycle Relief, helping get kids onto bikes in East Africa to get to and from school, even locally in Seattle and Boise. Boise Bicycle Project is an incredible nonprofit, getting local folks onto bicycles, who may not be able to afford them. They can come in and work at the co-op and fix up bikes, repair bikes, get credit to then, essentially purchase with sweat equity a bike to help them either get to work or get to school. They're things that we're certainly passionate about, and we've seen tremendous impact of mobility through bicycles.
And these are projects that need to be trackable. What makes a project trackable? How do you make sure that it is trackable?
Yeah. So we're very transparent about all of the giving projects that we do. So I think, from 2011, our first project, my wife and I, Rebecca, we went over to Liberia, Africa to work, more to observe our partners on the ground in Liberia who were doing some clean water projects that we had funded. And we had this incredible trip, took a lot of photos, came back, showed some of our friends, and my buddy Patrick, I have to credit this to him. He said, wait, so the bottle that I bought helped fund this water project in Liberia. And that's when a huge light bulb went off that, nobody at the time was really connecting the dots between, a for-profit company doing good and the grant making that was happening kind of on the back end. And so really from almost day one, on the transparency side, we've been granting since we started. That was baked into the model. And then as far as codes, we have a give code. It's really an invitation to the model of generosity. So when you register a give code, you're exposed to all the grant making projects that we've done since day one. And so you can discover what we've done in Honduras with great partners there as far as building toilets and clean water systems, to helping purchase a coffee coffee washing station in Rwanda. So it's really an invitation to explore all the projects that we've done since day one.
And you said that the moment that you opened up the packaging to get that first sample was a game changer for your business. What about that first time you gave the first grant? What was that feeling like?
Yeah, it was a bit surreal. There is this moment of like, we granted to Charity Water. I think Charity Water was our first nonprofit partner that we granted money to. And it was interesting because we've always granted on revenue versus profitability, because, if we had made claims that we were giving, a certain percentage of profit, we weren't profitable for 5 years. So we've always been granting on revenue. So even though we weren't profitable, we were still writing checks to nonprofit partners around the world, which is a bit unique. And I'd say, the first 5 years, it felt a little like maybe self-aggrandizing of like, oh, are we really doing good? Like, could I have stayed in corporate America and just like, made some money and then just like written checks, to nonprofits that we cared about? But I think after 5 years, and then starting to build and kind of like working on this marathon, now to be able to look back and say, wow, we've granted over $3 million. It feels certainly like we've created something that's beyond, anything Beck and I could have done individually, which is pretty exciting.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this quick word from Shopify.
The first cup of coffee, it was awful.
Meet Rod Johnson, co-founder of Black & Bold, a premium specialty coffee and tea company powered by Shopify.
The journey of Black & Bold started with us opening our online Shopify store while we were burning beans in my business partner's garage. Shopify allows us to stay true to our mission by having an easily customizable and responsive site that make it very easy for novices to try their hand in becoming entrepreneurs.
Get a free 14-day trial at shopify.com/podcast.
I'm talking with Brian Pape, founder of MiiR. It's a premium stainless steel drinkware company, and each year, Brian donates a portion of its revenue to sustainability projects. Now, looking at your latest impact report from 2021, you have decided to broaden your definition of impact. What was it before, and what did you learn about what it was before that made you change it to what it is now?
Yeah, it's a great question. From day one, like I said, we've always been granting to nonprofits. That's a huge piece of our business. But, as we look at impact holistically, we've really thought about, there's a lot of buzzwords out there: responsibility, sustainability, circular, and I think sustainability is probably the biggest. I don't know if it's a fallacy, but the idea that like you could be sustainable is somewhat true and untrue, meaning there's a responsible way to ship something, right? If you max out a 40-foot container per cubic foot, that's more responsible than putting one box in there and shipping it across the ocean, right? So there's this idea that we have an impact through our supply chain, we have an impact on our people, and we have an impact on our stakeholders. And so we've broadened our definition of impact to what are we doing for not only the final recipients from, generating revenue and choosing a grant, but then what is our impact on our own people? How are we supporting them from, benefits, whether it's 401k, bonuses, profit sharing, all the way to unlimited PTO, like those sort of things really matter. But also on the supply chain side, like, are we who we say we are? And are we, ethically sourcing? And I think we have probably one of the best supply chains, I'd say, in the stainless business. And that's due to a lot of hard work and a lot of verification and a lot of, working with third parties who are going in and auditing and making sure, that everything's above board, that's certified, everyone's getting paid a fair and livable wage in the supply chain. So impact for us is more broad. It also includes products. So how is a product made? Is it made with recycled material? Is it made with post-consumer recycled plastic? Is it made with recycled stainless? Are we, we've reduced poly bags, all virgin plastic poly bags. Some of the material finishes have to have a bag around it, but they're biodegradable. But most of the bags have been eliminated from our supply chain, meaning when you open up these beautiful boxes inside, we've been able to kind of design cardboard to be able to hold the bottle so it doesn't get scratched, doesn't get damaged in shipment, but effectively eliminated millions and millions of single-use poly bags, which, that's probably the dirty unknown secret in all consumer goods. If you go to any store, before it gets onto the retail floor, it's in a bag. Every shirt is in a bag for the most part. And so, I think that's a small piece, but it has tremendous impact to be able to move that kind of out of the supply chain. So like I said, we look at impact at a very broad level now, as opposed to just grant making to nonprofits.
Yeah, speaking of that, you have a developing and changing view of philanthropy, and you want to move from what's called a power-based philanthropy model to a relationship-based. What are the two? What's the difference between the two?
The old model, and a lot of credit is due to Mackenzie Bezos and some others, even Melinda Gates. There's certainly others who are in the space that are doing this, but this idea in the past was when you write a grant to a nonprofit, there's been this notion that like you grant, but you say you can only use these funds for actual work in the field. You can use it for anything except for admin and salaries. So it's very prescriptive, and it's very taxing isn't necessarily the right word, but it's kind of a burden on the nonprofit to say like you can use it for this but not that. And they're meanwhile trying to like write all these grant applications to like fund payroll, but then to fund like the work in the field. And so if you flip it and you think about like, imagine, private equity or VC or just investors going into a for-profit business and saying, hey, I'm going to invest, but you can only spend my investment on marketing, or you can only invest, you can only spend this investment on an office. It would become very disjointed for the entrepreneur. And so this power-based philanthropy model is the prescriptive model of, and then also I need, in return for this money, I need reports on how many people it's impacted and exactly where it's done and, all these things. Well, the mindset is shifting to more of relationship based. So, spend time getting to know the nonprofit. Do they have proper checks and balances? What is their, what do the financials look like? How do they lead? How do they hire? Really kind of getting under the hood of the nonprofit, and then building that relationship over the long haul. So we have some evergreen nonprofits is what we call them, where we're granting and we say, hey, we're not just going to do a spot grant. We're going to commit to you over 3 years. And we're going to donate, say, $250,000 every single year. So then they can actually plan, over the course of 3 years versus just kind of month in, month out going, oh my gosh, do we get money from this for-profit company or this for-profit company? So it kind of smooths out their donation cycle or their development plans. So it's really beneficial to the nonprofit. And the reality is like, they know their business better than we do, right? So why would we come in and say, hey, here's $250,000, but you can only spend it on doing this small thing? Like that's kind of unfair to the nonprofit, I think. And if you're really going to invest in change, build the relationship, give them the money and get out of the way. And the nonprofit so far, the feedback that we've received has been astounding. They've said, this MiiR is certainly leading the way. Most people don't think about it this way. They want prescriptive reports. They want to only fund X, Y, Z of the organization. You can fund this program, but not that program. And so again, we're trying to just build great relationships with incredible nonprofits that again are in that intersection of people and environment, grant them the money, get out of the way.
Yeah, you're certainly taking a different approach than what you might typically hear. And one other area that you've done this is with sourcing materials. You specifically use the Freedom of Information Act to source materials. And when I think about the Freedom of Information Act, I think about news organizations using it, but you use it for your business. Tell us how you did that.
Yeah. So, I think when entrepreneurs are starting, they're like, how did you find the factories? Or, how did you find the thing? And I don't know exactly. I can't remember where I learned this, but it might have been from Rick, who started Little Hottie's Hand Warmers, one of my business mentors. And essentially, because of the Freedom of Information Act, all import data is access to the public domain. You might have to pay to get really detailed information because it's kind of nebulous on the government websites, but there's companies that kind of filter it and make it searchable. So anyway, in 2009, when I wanted to start a drinkware company, I basically researched all the names of the companies of my competitors. Some companies, they hide their name. So it could be Dave's Bottle Company, but the reality is, Dave's Bottle Company might be run by randomcompanyllc.com. So you typically find the actual company name by searching who owns their trademark, who owns the domain, so, things like that. You can get to the bottom of who the actual company is. And then from there, you can essentially research import data. And sometimes it's hidden through a trading company. But for the most part, most of the companies just say the supplier right on the bill of lading. So the bill of lading is just a document that says where the product come from, how much is on there. So some people use it to track their competitors to see how many containers they're importing, what kind of product they're importing, where they're importing it from. So I took a Venn diagram of 3 of my, what I thought were the top competitors that I could be competing against that were at REI. They all had a similar factory, and booked a ticket over to China, met with the factory and started, and it was kind of off to the races.
Is this something that takes a long time? Like how quickly were you able to get this information?
I mean, it's almost instant. You can get onto like Import Genius or some of these other websites and see it very quickly. And now it's moving and progressing to where it's on people's websites. Patagonia has kind of led that way of the Footprint Chronicles. Everlane does that. We're about to expose the entire supply chain for us, all the way down to the ship level. Because it's, I think consumers are demanding it. They want to know where stuff's made. There used to be this mindset of like, oh, if people know where you're making it, that could be bad because they could either leverage your hard work in the factories. But the reality is we want all workers to be paid fairly. So we want better factories out there. And so if an entrepreneur wants to piggyback off a supplier that we've helped build a relationship with, we're fine with that. The reality is it comes down to brand. And that's something that we spend a tremendous amount of time on.
I'm talking with Brian Pape, founder of MiiR. It's a premium stainless steel drinkware company. And each year, Brian donates a portion of its revenue to sustainability projects. So the entrepreneurial spirit is definitely in your blood. Your grandfather founded a business after World War II that's still running today. You owned a media company before this, and you sold it before MiiR. How did these experiences growing up help you with MiiR?
Yeah, it's interesting. Looking back on entrepreneurialism, I guess. It's interesting because it's kind of popular now. It's trending. I think with the rise of Instagram, there's people who are, maybe they're entrepreneurs, maybe they're not, but it's certainly, I think it's now somewhat cool to be an entrepreneur. I think back in 2009, it was kind of still a weird thing to do. And social entrepreneurs was definitely not a thing. It was, Blake from Tom's was kind of like one of the early ones, and that was 2006, 2007. So in 2009, there weren't a lot of us, with this idea that like business could help people. They were like, that's what nonprofits do. But I think looking back, whether it's in my blood or just observing people around me, I was the kid in 5th grade who somehow figured out how to build, little origami paper cranes. And, this is pre-internet. So no one else at my school in Boise, Idaho knew how to do this. And so I learned about supply and demand and scarcity, and I'd make paper cranes and hustle kids lunch money for them, and get them to pay me 50 cents for a paper crane, and then I'd make a different color the next day and sell it for more, or like these sort of things are just things that I naturally kind of gravitated to. And I picked up our family's video camera in junior high and started filming for fun, just making goofy videos and whatnot. And I think my cousin was getting married and she needed someone to film it, so I think she paid me $200 to film her wedding. And I was like, oh my gosh, how many lawns I'd have to mow in order to get $200. So that kind of sparked a lot of entrepreneurialism for me. I think of just this idea that, I could find a way to leverage my time in a unique way. And so that's kind of always been there. And I love starting things. I've really become, I've really fallen in love with not just starting, but building. I would consider myself not a serial entrepreneur. I have very little interest in starting another company. I like new ideas, but I like it in the context of what we've been able to create at MiiR, and certainly am enjoying kind of the scaling of building a team, building culture, building trust amongst our team, building trust amongst our customers. Because I'll never forget the first 5 years of MiiR was excruciatingly painful, because nobody knows who you are, nobody knows what you're up to, and you're just constantly having to explain yourself. I mean, we still do. We're not this like megacorp. So it's certainly, we explain it, but it's a little bit more of a household name in certain categories.
Yeah, I think that's an important point about how the first, in your case, 5 years, there was a struggle. It wasn't greased. It wasn't an easy journey. What kept you going? Like, what allowed you to come into the office every single day and keep on going at it, even though the progress was slow at first?
That's a good question. I think that's probably credit to observing my grandfather and my family grow a family business, of seeing them, slowly over 80 years build this incredible business, and to see what they were able to accomplish, I think was really in the back of my mind going, okay, you're not going to get, first of all, for me, it's not about getting rich. It's about having impact in the world. And I think that's what's interesting is I think a lot of entrepreneurs, maybe they get into it for the money, but once you get into it and you have the impact of a customer thanking you for the incredible product they've made, or a nonprofit thanking you for the donation that was made possible. I mean, that stuff is what's enriching in your life, or mentoring or coaching employees who, whether they choose to stay around or even leave on great terms, like that's what's rewarding. And so I think in the back of my mind, it was always about, this paced growth mentality of like, hey, it's going to take some time. But also we kind of joke, my wife and I joke that I think I'm fairly unemployable, meaning, if I had to go get a job, I don't even really know what I would do, because it's, I don't have like one specific skill. I think just that idea of waking up and knowing that what I'm doing every single day matters. So I think that was a huge piece of, when it's hard and the going's hard and you're not profitable, those first 5 years not being profitable, but knowing that you're still having impact on people's lives. And you get perspective, right? When you travel around the world, we were in Myanmar in, I think, 2015, and you're meeting people whose entire families were wiped out by a tsunami, and so for them, they're grateful to wake up and to have, clean water and food, so like that perspective, I think, helps when you can kind of go, woe is me, the business is hard, it's struggling, but hey, there's so many things we have to be thankful for.
Lots of people want to give back and become social entrepreneurs. but are there any challenges that are specific to running a business that has a philanthropic component?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, there's a lot of pitfalls. If I had to think about it, some of the things that maybe aren't known, I'd say, when, a lot of people's hearts are in the right place, which is great. I think the other piece is that you really have to have it together, meaning as soon as you start to take a stance, especially on a consumer product or consumer product company, when you're externally facing and you're out in the world and you're pushing stuff out into the world, whether it's content, product, hang tags, you're going to get stuff wrong and they're going to tell you you're wrong. So it's listening. There's some stuff in the past where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if that was like the best way we could have painted, our nonprofit grant work, whether it's photos or whatever it may be. And so, it's all kind of being willing to be open and listen to the other folks out there who may be pushing back on the concept. But I think being in the right place, knowing why you're doing it and having some good data points behind you as to why you're doing it, but also being like, hey, that's interesting. We've had people, I'll give you an example. This is less on the nonprofit side, but we had a woman who emailed us and she said, hey, I'm a customer, I'm Black. This is probably 5 years ago. And she said, I love MiiR. I love the product. I love the mission. But I got to tell you, I don't see a lot of people like me in your advertising or your marketing efforts. Okay, that's interesting. Let's note that. Let's solve that and let's figure that out. And, so we kind of thought, okay, well, what photos do we take? And we're like, well, we don't have much money, so we kind of just take photos of ourselves. And we're like, and our friends. Okay, well, we're in Seattle, not super diverse. Let's make sure that we're hiring people and photographers from all over the world, because the reality is our products are used by so many people. We're sold in 62 countries, so it's really a matter of a reflection of let's just take photos of our actual customers or people that interact with the product from around the world. That is this beautiful, kind of diverse piece of the puzzle. And so I think, that's an example where it's, you don't really expect it. You listen, you thank them for the feedback. I mean, what a brave thing to do. And we're certainly grateful for that feedback.
So your products are sold in 62 countries, over 3 million in grants. Where do you want to see MiiR go next? Yeah,
I think, for us, we're always going to be committed to this idea of designing really beautiful products and being a generous company. I think, and certainly 10 years, 20 years from now, I think my hope is that people really look to MiiR and going, wow, MiiR was really kind of next level on what it means to be a generous company. My buddy Propaganda, who's a hip hop artist, he talks about the possibility, and it's kind of his broad concept of, imagine a better future and what is the possibility of business. And so I think for us, we're trying to imagine a new possibility for business. I think capitalism in some circumstances has rightfully gotten a bad rap. But I do think that the power of the marketplace, the power of trade is so powerful that if we imagine a new possibility of what can we be generous with? Can we be more generous with our time? Can we be more generous to our stakeholders and our supply chain and our employees? I think there's a really beautiful future ahead. And I hope MiiR is really at the center and pushing kind of the bounds of what a business can and should do for the world.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Brian Pape, founder of MiiR, premium stainless steel vessels for coffee, beer, wine, and food, and donates revenue to organizations with sustainability in mind. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have this week. Come hang out with us next time on Shopify Masters. Again, I'm Felix Tia. Take care.